All right, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is your main man, A Different Echelon, on the A Different Echelon podcast. We're here to educate, encourage, and enrich. We have a very, very good show for you today. I'm very excited about the show. Um, uh, Words cannot express my excitement about this show today. We're going to be facing a subject that all of us need to face, at least most of us, my friends and my family. But first of all, I'd like to just welcome everybody to the podcast. To the podcast today. We're here in Charleston, South Carolina, where it is today is a little bit more chilly than it had been. Had warmed up a little bit, but we're ready to get going and move out of the winter time here for sure, and get down to these flip flops and these tank tops like we do here in Charleston. But once again, just a little bit of current events. We found out that President Biden is in office now. He and Vice President Kamala Harris. So they're doing their thing, making their strides to get their policies pushed. Despite who you vote for, who you voted for, or who you support, please just respect the office of the presidency and vice presidency, as I always say. This is not a political podcast or broadcast, but we like to give love and show love to everybody. So keep that in mind. But we're just going to hit the ground running. We're not going to wait any longer. Just a gentleman that I'm about to bring on is a new friend. When I say new friend, I mean freshly new friend. Shout out to my cousin, Belinda Butts, who made this happen for me. Hopefully she's watching today. She just called me. So thank you, cuz. Very happy that we were able to make this connection. But without further ado, I'm going to bring in my new friend, good friend, Mr. Ron Homer. What's up, Ron?
What's going on? How are you?
I'm doing great, my friend. About yourself?
I can't complain. Everything is good. I like your segue. This isn't a political podcast, but I will say this: I think that our better times are ahead.
Yes,
I think
that's
for
right.
many of us, and I'm optimistic that the future looks bright in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, for sure. So this is Ron Homer of CapTrust Financial, and I asked him to come on tonight because a lot of times in life we have it and then we don't have it. I'm talking about money. We see a bank account that has one number, and before you know it, like that is all it's gone. So this gentleman is going to help us to answer some questions about how we can better manage our money. So Ron, can I call you Ron? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right, very good, Ron. So if you can give some of the viewers and listeners how you got started in this field.
Well, my story is pretty interesting in the sense that I got started in this field because I am the oldest son of an African American male that grew up in Brooklyn. He was first generation.
Brooklyn.
Big ups to BK. So he came here with very little. His parents were first generation immigrants, and I think for your listeners, most of us who've come to this country, who've been here, in the last 50, 60 years, that was the way that we came here for a better opportunity. So his parents brought him here. They didn't have much except a dream and a vision, but also, the nucleus of a family, that an extended family, if you will, that really kind of binded together to make sure that they were educated. They focused on the right types of values, but also put themselves in a position to take advantage of a lot of windfall when it came about. And I was born into that type of environment as a kid. And my father was the first to graduate from college, and he went into business. And so as the eldest son in the household, like many of your listeners, and I'm sure folks out there, coming up in similar dynamic, you gravitate to what your parents do. It's the easiest thing to do. And for me, because he was on a trajectory that was going up, and we weren't far apart in age, by the way. My parents were 19 going on 20 when they had me.
Okay.
So that's, you think about that. I'm 53 now. That was back in 1967.
Right.
The deck was stacked against them. The proverbial deck was certainly stacked
Yeah.
against them.
Most
You're,
certainly.
you're a college grad, you don't have a lot of money, and now you have a family. So, we're talking about money matters here.
Yeah.
I raised that example because, there wasn't a lot of room for error for Ron and Cheryl Homer. You know what I mean? I'm a junior. And what they had to do was figure out their priorities, at a very young age with a lot less, information around them. Because think about what I said when I told you my story. Their parents were new to this country. All they knew is they got to get a job, take care of their family. But as far as money matters, investing, things like that, that was foreign to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a long line of history that my parents could go back to and kind of revisit,
Mm-hmm.
to learn lessons and things like that. They were the trailblazers.
Right.
So as somebody coming up 19 years apart from both parents in that kind of family dynamic, the first thing I learned when we didn't have much and we had to band together, myself, we were a family of four and a younger brother, was making sure that we understood the difference between our wants and our needs.
Mm-hmm.
I know as folks, we often have struggles in our life, and I know I struggle with it. I may want something today, but then I have to tell myself on the ride home from work, do I really need this?
Right.
You know what I mean? And I raised that probably as the first piece to kind of segue into more structural stuff around money matters, is because that's where it all starts. We all want to make money, we want to get a good job, but the problem begins when we get paid, really deciphering, are we spending our money in the areas where we really need to versus where we want to?
Right.
And I think that's at the crux of the matter when you think about, African Americans and other minority groups that, come through a similar track like I did into this country, even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Is where do you kind of, get the information necessary to build a solid foundation around how to handle your money?
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of things that I would probably call out, and then we can kind of talk more in any direction that you think, kind of makes sense. First things first is when you get paid, there's a couple of things that you should consider that are hardcore rule of thumbs. And you can read this stuff. It's out there in textbooks. It's actually out there in a lot of different places, blogs, online. It's all out there. Number one, you got to pay yourself first. So before you spend any money on any kind of items, anything that you fancy is important to you, make sure you pay yourself first. And you should probably pay yourself no less than 10%.
Okay.
And I say pay yourself first out of what you make, because in essence, you worked hard for that money. By paying yourself first, you're taking the first step in ensuring that you're carving out some of your earnings in such a way that's going to be parked for something that you may want to use down the road from an investment standpoint, or even going back to that wants and needs kind of dialogue I referenced before.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you stopped there because my parents, my father was from South Carolina. My mother, who's still with us, she's from Georgia, and they moved to New York. So I could not imagine, and they didn't move to. They met in New York. Let me make myself clear on that. I could not imagine coming from one country to another and having to make it work. And I have to say this, and this happened in my family. My dad was a very good person with money, but his belief system was you paid your bills first. So you paid your bills first, and then if you had any left over, you can put a little cherry on top of your ice cream. But sometimes you couldn't even afford the ice cream. So it's very interesting that you say that, because I know some people still have that same belief system that you take care of what needs to be taken care of first. But not to put words in your mouth, but I think what you're saying is you need to, feel some sense of accomplishment that you have worked that 2 week period or that 1 week period or 1 month period, that you do deserve some type of pleasure. Am I right in saying that?
100. I mean, I think that's key. We we all have to take care of, responsibilities like you referenced, in terms of how you were raised,
Right.
paying your bills and making sure you're staying on the right side of that ledger. But
Right.
you also got to, if you're not paying yourself, then it's going to be awfully hard to get to a place where you can get your head above water, so to speak, in
Right.
terms of even thinking about investing and then even having an opportunity to
Mm.
get into anything that might produce other types of, revenue streams.
And I think, the danger is the temptation of buying something. First of all, over splurging, number one, and then buying something that you really don't need. So it's one thing to buy, say, a pair of $100 sneakers or shoes or whatever it may be, but it's another thing of buying four pair or one pair for $400. So I guess my question to you, and I guess this is more like an emotional question or a psychological question, how do you keep yourself from doing it? Would you recommend giving yourself a budget of $100 or $50? Based on, literally how your money's looking. How would you?
Yeah, I think, there's no hard and fast rule there, but I think, what I think folks should think about if they're trying to make that decision between one and four pairs of sneakers is,
Right.
what's the purpose and the use of those sneakers? Are you going to need to wear four pairs of sneakers in a 7 day,
Yeah.
week, or
Right.
can you get away with maybe one pair instead of a $400 pair and have one that's maybe 150? You know what
Right.
I mean?
Right.
Rock that for a couple of weeks, and then when your money starts to get a little bit and you paid yourself that 10% I was referencing,
Right.
and it starts to build up, then you go back and get that second pair if that's what you desire.
Right.
But
Right.
getting it all at once because your check that you got this week yielded enough to cover that
Right.
is probably not the best approach in terms of how to handle that kind of expenditure.
Right, right, exactly. So I guess to answer my own question, and I think this is a question that other people may have, is you have to exercise restraint. You got to be
Exactly.
sensible in
Exactly.
what you're doing. So that's very, very interesting. So you said you have a few items there. So that was the first item. What would be the second item?
Yeah, I think. Well, I like where you started because I think we all struggle with that. You know what
Okay.
I mean? We've got a voice in our head that's telling us a lot of times, "I'll make it up later." You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
I gotta have it now. I'll deal with that later. And I struggle with that myself. As somebody who's in the financial game, so to
Right.
speak, in terms of what I do for a profession.
Right.
I think the second thing is really we got to become, and I mean it's probably for a lot of your listeners. One of the things historically African Americans struggle with is, once we get a good job, that's when we start to think about how to be more disciplined with our money.
Okay.
And really, that's kind of created some of what many people are probably starting to read and hear about through different channels. And it's coming to, the head right now with the Biden administration coming in is there's a huge wealth gap in this country.
Yes, it
And,
is.
and there's the haves and the have-nots are more further apart than they've ever been historically right now today. And I can tell you on the heels of 2020, which is tough as it was with COVID and everything else, the gap got even bigger because it was the best year in the stock market. So what does that all mean for folks that are listening is that if you had money and you were employed last year and you managed to get through COVID unscathed, you had money in the bank, you had money to play with, so to speak, investing in the market. Not only did you make money, but you got richer.
Right.
So if you take that in context, now the folks that didn't have any, now the gap in terms of the folks who had money and made a little bit more in 1 year has
Mhm.
got further away from those that didn't have any. Okay.
Right.
And so what does that really mean in the context of everyday life? It just means that basically, there are opportunities that come about through historically, when you think about investing in this country, where they're opportune to be in a space where you can put money out there and get a higher return. And
Right.
I think They don't happen all the time. No one has a crystal ball to know when it's going to happen. But the key is if you're starting out now and you come up with a more disciplined approach with your expenditures, meaning how you save, how you spend, you put yourself in a position with that 10% you've been carving away
Mm-hmm.
to have a chance to really get involved when these opportunities exist. But if you're doing what you referenced before, like you had heard when you were a child, pay your bills first. If you're just chasing the paycheck every week, paying your bills, and there's not much left other than a pair of sneakers, and you got to get the new ones because there's new ones every other month coming out,
True.
you're never going to get to a space where you can take advantage of really kind of building some wealth and some capital. So I think that's it. That's a key one. So debt management is what I'm kind of talking about here, managing, what you spend, what you save. Third one is really kind of thinking, about when you do decide to spend some of that savings, spend it on things that return some value.
Right.
That's a critical one, I think, for us as a group of people is that, we haven't had a lot of education in that space. We haven't had a lot of role models a lot of times, to teach us those lessons at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one that I'm trying to teach my children.
Right.
One that I'm trying to teach a lot of the clients that I talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Invest in things that don't have high depreciation, meaning that they fall in value right after you buy, and then invest in things that if you hold it long enough, that it could appreciate in such a way that you can turn around and sell it or deed it to somebody and get more than what you paid for in return.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Two things I want to say about that. And I shared with you before we started tonight. Can you hear me okay, Ron?
I hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you great. Thank you. And before I say this next thing, if you guys have any comments or you have any issues hearing us, please, type it into the comment section and I'll try to adjust it, or Ron may try to adjust it. But as I was saying, two things I mentioned to you, or one thing I mentioned to you about me being a musician, I have a lot of equipment. And when I purchase equipment, and those who know about musical equipment, it's very costly. We're talking about the high hundreds and in the thousands, to buy even like a replacement part or whatever it may be. Whenever I go to I made a purchase actually last night, and I said to myself, this is going to make me money. So this is an investment. And so I was okay with doing that. You understand what I'm saying? So I was okay with making that because I knew it was going to make me money. And the second story I want to share is I have an uncle who retired from Ford. And the car that I had at the time, he told me, he says, that's a very good car. Do not get into the rat race of trying to buy a newer car every 2 years or whatever it may be. He says, because, and I mentioned this the other day to a friend of mine. He says, because by the time you drive it off the lot, it's already depreciated in value. And I didn't really understand it at the time, but as I got older, I did understand it. And I think once again, there is a struggle, there's a conflict internally that we always feel, and this is not all of us, it's some of us, that we feel like we have to get the newest, the biggest, what appears to be the best. But to be honest with you, there's certain cultures that will wear the same pair of pants for 30 years. You know what I'm saying? And I guess with these kinds of conversations, it gives us, number one, knowledge, but also like a bit of encouragement to go forward and not feel like you have to spend all the time and get the newest and biggest thing. So what do you say to that?
No, I think that's spot on. I couldn't have said it any better myself. I think, the key in your example there is that, sometimes it's best to really kind of hold on to what you have.
Right.
Because it goes back to the wants and needs. If that car is driving fine and it's getting you to and from and you keep it up, which I'm sure you do,
Yeah.
Where it looks pristine, you're getting it washed, it's clean inside, everything works, it's not broken, ride that bad boy.
Yeah.
I'm a strong proponent, but I'll take it a step further. I mean, since you reference cars, one of my best friends has been in the car business for 50 years. He actually inherited his business from his father.
Okay.
And your comment is well put, because that's one of the worst things to invest in to attain wealth. You know what I mean? Because it does depreciate as soon as you drive off the lot.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? It means that, you're better off buying a vehicle that is stable, reliable, an excellent brand, has some form of a warranty,
Mm-hmm.
and you maintain it, under the guidelines of what's out there. So, I mean, since we're talking about cars, because I think it's relevant, because
Right.
we all like cars, I 17, 18 years ago decided to buy my first luxury brand vehicle. You know what I mean? And I didn't go all out, but I certainly went high end, and I bought what was a BMW.
Mm-hmm.
And I did my research on it. And the reason I bought it was beyond the fact I always wanted one when I was a kid growing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
me too.
it was a flashy car,
Yeah, no
and I
doubt.
and I liked the way it looked. It was very appealing.
Right.
So the second part was because I had done the research on it, the reliability of that vehicle was second to none.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that most BMW owners, when I bought my first one, the average life expectancy of that vehicle was 10 years plus.
Okay.
We got people that are driving around that car, and it doesn't look like a 10-year-old car.
Right.
Those cars age very well.
Mm-hmm.
They never grow out of style.
Mm-hmm.
The look is been created in such a way that it's not going to look like something from another time zone. You know
Right.
what I mean? Or a
Right.
time period, I should
Not
say.
be right. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think that's important. And so you're 100% right. Cars are probably not the best thing to invest in if you're trying to attain wealth.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
The better things to invest in, like homes, you know
Right.
what I mean? Or rental properties, or an
Mm-hmm.
apartment, or a co-op,
Right.
folks that are in cities, because those particular items give you a couple of opportunities that, a vehicle wouldn't. Number one, you got a roof over your head, and that's probably the number one thing you should want to attain in life as a young
Right.
person growing up. Your first goal in life after finishing school or starting a profession and getting to a place where you feel like, you finally kind of getting into the routine where you're respected in your craft. If that's your thing, it should be, I got to get my house first.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And if I get my house, then I can start thinking about what I want to do on top of that, because a house is probably the most important asset that an individual can own in this country, especially. And if you go back historically, a lot of the people that we read about in books and things like that in the early 1900s and so forth, a lot of their wealth was accumulated because they bought property and they bought their first house with all their savings and didn't
Right.
have anything else.
Right.
And once they had that in their back pocket, so to speak, they were able to start to build on that and think about how to get into different avenues that create more money for them. But you
Right.
got that one asset that nobody can ever take from you. And then, the housing market traditionally, has always maintained a certain level that you're not going to lose money. You can, but historically, when you look over time, it hasn't stayed down, you
Right.
know, long enough to put yourself in a position to be harmed. And it's one of the best investments still in the United States, to really kind of look at if you're trying to get your footing in something wealth oriented.
Right. Yeah. And I share with you. I bought my house, my first house, a year. It was a year in August of last year, and I was very proud of myself. I was by myself. I was very proud of myself, but I felt like I actually had something that I owned. I'm not afraid to say that the cars I've had in the past were co-signed by my parents, and because I didn't have strong enough credit, I didn't have those things. And, I've always been blessed to actually have a little money in my pocket. But when you don't have credit, it's difficult to attain certain things unless you have straight up cash in a lot of times. And that brings me to a book that I read, Rich Dad Poor Dad, written by Robert Kiyosaki.
Good
And
book.
yeah, it is a good book. But he actually hyper focuses, I'd say, hyper focuses on the importance of credit. So can you kind of break some of what he said or what he feel like? Can you break it down from your standpoint? I guess is credit versus cash, or he's more so he's also an opponent of the current U.S. Educational system. But let's talk about credit a little bit and from his standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, his standpoint is, he kind of looks at credit as a detriment, you know what I mean, if you will, in terms of, what it can do to harm you if you don't have good credit,
Right,
and I
right,
think, and so, when you think about credit, you should think about that's your opportunity to borrow from a place or an entity when you don't have enough means in your own savings
right,
to go out there and attain something like a home for
right,
that matter. None of us are going to have 200,000 and up just sitting in the bank ready to go buy our first property. And it
right,
wouldn't be a wise investment to do such a thing,
right,
because you're better off kind of putting that money to work in other ways for you if a bank's going to lend you money. But here's the crux. If you don't have good credit, you can't get that bank to lend you the money at favorable interest rates that would allow you to become a homeowner.
mm-hmm.
And as it relates to our group of people, we're left out of a lot of situations around this country because certain institutions have kind of geared, practices over the last 75 years that have been predatory
Right,
and downright discriminatory in
yeah,
terms of letting us into that home ownership game,
right, right,
And so you were already playing a game if your credit was good that was kind of geared away from you to succeed in that space.
right,
Laws have changed dramatically that have kind of righted some of the wrongs, but does it still happen? 100%.
no doubt.
Banks are able to kind of pull reports on us, and now in the information age where everything is digitized and you can Google anything, rest assured, they know exactly who's borrowing from them at all times.
Right,
And the first canceller in the line of checklists, is credit. And you don't meet that minimum requirement, Darius, like we were talking, it makes it awfully difficult for you to get an opportunity to kind of enter into the game of building a solid foundation with your money or with borrowing to get
yeah.
that.
And so, in your opinion, I'm glad you said that because that's very true. And like I said, I typically had, some of the cash, but I just could not meet it. So, and I know in order for me to purchase this home, I had to get my credit up, like I told you. What would you say would be an acceptable credit score for people to even look at you?
Well, ideally, there's a bunch of different agencies out there that kind of use different score techniques.
Criteria is
So
right.
Experian, Transamerica, Equifax, those are the big ones.
Yeah,
You
TransUnion,
know,
right?
what's that?
TransUnion,
TransUnion.
right?
Yep.
Okay,
So where they all fall out is they are really giving you a score based on your credit worthiness. And a good score for the vast majority of those agencies is in the high sixes.
mm-hmm.
That's when you start to cross the threshold of average to good.
Right,
So I would probably say 680 and above in today's
mm-hmm.
world
Right,
is not good. You just got into the good box from
mm-hmm.
average.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Solid, really good credit, very good, upward to excellent, high sevens.
Okay,
Okay. So that's 100-point swing right there.
right,
680 to 780.
mm-hmm.
That's the place that most of us want to play in.
Right.
And the reason I put that out there is a range because, once you get your credit to that space,
mm-hmm.
you immediately afford yourself the opportunity to negotiate interest rates when you borrow,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's for a car or a house
Right,
or anything for that matter.
right,
Okay. A business. You're starting a business, you want a business loan. You're not in the driver's seat to dictate any kind of demands on the money that you're borrowing from any entity until your credit score is in that range, because they have already categorized you below that range as somebody that's a higher risk.
A risk, yeah.
And then if you take it a step further, the personal element, which we kind of touched on here, knowing how we've gotten into this game here in this country and some of the things that we've been affected by, you're African American, you're Latino, there's a certain level of discrimination that still persists in these institutions, where even when you have the good credit, you got to know what your rights are and be able to stand your ground on that and shop, okay, and hold different entities to a higher standard, because that's what you're entitled to, based on the numbers.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So how would you, if someone is in any range and they want to increase their credit, how would you recommend someone to raise their credit scores?
So I think it goes back to the debt management conversation we were having at the beginning. I mean, it's making sure that you never get, and I like to use this phrase, ahead of your skis, so to speak.
Yeah.
Skiers, don't like to be ahead of their skis, because the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to fall.
Right.
And you might hurt yourself really bad.
Right.
So I think that not getting ahead of your skis in the spending patterns.
Right.
Meaning, spending all of your check, living paycheck to paycheck, not taking care of your bills in a timely manner, not parking that 10% away in savings, overextending yourself beyond what you make in income annually, weekly, monthly. Those are all things that you want to really pay close attention to ensure that your credit score doesn't follow suit and get you way out there in such a space that, you can't recover from easily.
Right.
The flip side is, many of us have had certain unforeseen events that happen.
Right.
And it's not always our doing that gets us into a position where your credit score drops, and life happens, so to speak.
Right.
And so, rest assured, all is not lost there. You can recover, but the way to recover is probably by three critical things. One, not spending beyond your means. When you figure out that you're going to come up with a game plan to get out of the debt, pay the debt down to a nominal number, nominal meaning where it's almost at zero, or something that's very small and insignificant and not a drain on you. And then the third one is, making sure, that you don't take on more expenses in the process. You know what I mean? And I put that out there because a lot of folks don't talk about that. They say, well, I'm paying down my debt. I'm going to get from underneath this rock. I'm going to get my credit up. But then the minute somebody calls you for a new credit card, you're like, you know what? I always wanted one of those.
Right.
I'm going to get that too. You know what I mean? Because guess what? I'll get another $1,000, $5,000 that I got in my back pocket. So when I want those sneakers, guess what? I'll just say, I'm going to use this card to get those sneakers. I didn't get paid this week, but I'm going to get these and I'll pay them in 30 days. You know what I mean? So you got to really pay attention to that. You got to kind of become very disciplined in paying your bills. Timely is important. And then, but again, credit card companies, as well as those agencies we talked about that look at the scores, they're also factoring in how much of the available credit you have you're actually utilizing.
Right.
So one of the ways to increase your score is not using the credit. Let them give it to you. If you got 5,000 that, let's say Capital One gives you that you can use on a card, and you've only spent $10 on it for the next 6 months, you know what's going to happen? Capital One is going to increase your limit, and your credit score is going to go up by a certain amount, because they've been looking to see what your expenditures have been like. The fact that you have available credit versus being maxed out on that card is going to play a strong factor in how that credit score rises a lot faster.
Yeah, and I can definitely attest to that, because again, in this process, I gained a credit card to gain better credit, and I was told not to go any more than 30%. So I have a friend that is kind of like in this mode now where he's trying to buy a house, and I told him, I said, get a credit card or whatever. If you have a credit card, don't breach 30% of the, So in other words, don't go into the 70 percentile of the credit card because they're looking to see your habits. And I said, resist the urge of, getting more credit cards because a couple things. Number one, when I say, hey, Ron, I'm going to give you a credit card, what you hear is, I just gave you $5,000. That's not what happened. That's not what happened.
That's
You know what
right.
I'm saying? That comes with a price. And the price is what they call interest and is also going to affect your credit. That's one thing I like to say. And another thing too, and I like you to speak on this. Um, Payday loan companies,
Mm.
checking the cash companies, those things are the devil. And I know, like you said, sometimes people do get out ahead of their skis or they do have life emergencies that may happen or life circumstances. But if at all costs, please avoid those agencies because they're rigged to put you further and further in the hole. And what happens is that you believe in your head that that money is yours. When they write you a check for $1,500 or however they give it to you, that's not the case at all. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I mean, I think because the way that the lending community operates, they're always looking for newer customers. I mean, that's their business.
New
And
suckers.
yeah, exactly. So, where's the best place to find folks? Usually folks that don't have a lot of education or knowledge around what it is that they're up to. And
Yes.
so, I mean, you called those groups out. Those folks are basically, predatory in a
Yeah.
lot of different ways, and I think for most of your listeners and even folks, beyond that, what you have to understand is, if you start to do the things that you and I are talking about here, Darius, you're going to become, I guess the easiest way to describe it, you're going to become popular
Mm,
to an audience that you didn't even know existed. So
right.
let's say you're saving your money, you're being very diligent in how you spend it, you're not doing anything crazy with the credit card that you got in your back pocket. You're going to get all kinds of offers all day long. And it's going to feel great because now you're going to feel like we all like to feel important. You're
Hmm.
going to get letters in the mail. You just won this. You just got this opportunity. And human instinct is, we like to feel appreciated.
Right.
We like to be recognized. And we like people to know we're here. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? So those three things are never going to change. But what you have to be much more skilled at is discerning, there's never a free lunch.
Right.
So, despise the free lunch,
Hmm.
as Robert Greene wrote in the 48 Laws of Power.
Right.
Great book to pick up, if you really want to learn
You said
some
48 laws of power?
48 Laws of Power.
Okay.
Talks about life, not necessarily finance, but it's a
Right.
great book. And one of the laws is always despise the free lunch,
Right.
meaning that anytime somebody says, I'm going to give you this,
Right.
you only have to do this. And it doesn't seem like there's any kind of equal value.
Right.
There's something to it. You know what I mean? Could be higher interest rate, could be some hidden, fees that you're not aware of,
Right.
balloon payments that you're going to have to come up with, or you'll be in trouble. I raised that because a lot of what happened in 2008 in the housing crisis that we all went through here, that's exactly what occurred.
Hmm.
Folks who basically had their credit at such a level that they were getting offers to say, hey man, you can get this interest-free loan. We won't charge you for a period of time. And then lo and behold, when it was time to pay the piper, they didn't have the money. And
Hmm.
home being foreclosed on left and right.
Right.
You know, and what also happened was because so much time had elapsed with some of these folks who had been in the game, living a good life, buying the Range Rover. We were talking about cars. Probably had 9 pairs of sneakers at the time, not 4. You know what I mean? Looking like they were doing it, and they
Mhm.
were maybe for a year, 2 years, maybe even some instances, 4 or 5. You know, but what they failed to really look at is what you talked about here is the fine print. And
Mhm.
those types of companies, they work off of getting people that they know are not going to be astute enough to
Right.
discern, where the trick is in this type of arrangement. And that's kind of what happened with the housing crisis is you had folks who were buying properties, good investment as we discussed here, but they were getting ahead of their skis that they were basically taking the house and using it as a credit card.
Right.
Right. Taking the equity, going out buying other things, and not realizing that now the house may not be worth all of what I've extended myself in debt on. And that
Yeah.
put them in a bad place in a lot of different ways. So we got
Yeah.
to guard against.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. I actually saw a movie. There's a movie that came out that kind of chronicled the 2008 market crash. I forgot the name of it, but it was a very cleverly made and directed movie. But it really brought me into the light because at the time I was, living in an apartment. I was renting, so I didn't really know a lot of what was going on. But to your point, you're exactly right. They looked like they were doing it, down in Florida, which it seems like, Florida is like the wild, wild west. Everything bugged out happens in Florida. But people, who were not eligible for one home, they were having two and three homes. And all three homes were getting foreclosed on because, they were out above ahead of their skis and, spending money that they didn't have. And I think that, what's very interesting to me, living here in the Charleston area, we drive here a lot. We don't really have a public transportation system. So, I drive and I notice that there's certain big type businesses in certain neighborhoods. So, you're not going to see a, payday loan place in a very affluent neighborhood because they don't have those types of issues. They're literally, looking for their clientele. Their clientele is not there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you're going to find certain restaurants that are not going to be in certain neighborhoods because the clientele is not there. So what's interesting to me is that, we need to identify that. You run down the street, you're stuck in traffic, you see a billboard on one side of town, you see no resemblance of that billboard on the other side of town. So the other side of town, that's intentional. You know what I mean? And we have to be wise to that. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on to kind of give us some clue as to why these things are happening and then help us to be able to get out and work our way out of this situation. But I want to go back a little bit. You had several points. Of course, pay yourself first, be disciplined, and spend on something that's going to, return a value to you. Did you want to extend that list at all anymore, or that's pretty
No,
much?
I think for the purposes of where we are, where we're talking about today, I mean,
Yeah,
personal finance, which is what we're talking about, is, and then even for folks that may have struggled a little bit,
right.
it's important to know that you can recover. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not a death sentence by any stretch. You know what I
right.
mean? The things that you and I are talking about here are just more to, I guess, in some ways, call attention to the
Yeah,
fact that there are these things out there, like you're saying, organizations that advertise in our communities. That's by design, to your
right,
point. I mean, it's to
right.
keep you in that environment,
Yeah,
and make sure you don't break out and kind of go and do things that will allow you to be a little bit more upwardly mobile. That's an entrenchment factor.
yeah. It is. It's intentional. Now you brought up the 48 laws of power by Robert
So
Greene.
yeah, so 48 Laws of Power is interesting because it uses historical events that have occurred, nothing to do with finance for
Okay.
that matter, but it's life lessons. You know what I
Okay.
mean? And power is something that we all want in our lives, even at the lowest levels. We
Right.
want to be in control of our money. We
Right.
want to always be in control of our emotions. And then last but not least, we want to be in control of our families and what we do with them. You know what I mean? And not feel like we're being dictated to.
Mhm.
So I always liked it because, I always was someone who was an avid reader, but I was always reading, to, figure out how to do something. And when I
Mhm.
read this, it wasn't a how-to manual, but it was more written in a way that gave me real life experiences and historical ones that famous people have gone through
Mhm.
throughout time, that where they applied the actual laws that we're talking about. And the one that I just referenced, around, uh, correct me if I'm wrong. What was it that I said? It was despise the free lunch.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
they'll tell a story to accentuate the point of, if somebody comes to you and says, look, I got this, I think it was almost like an ancient Mesopotamian story where a guy had a bag of jewels. And he said to the bread maker, he says, listen, I'll give you this bag of jewels if you make bread for me for the next 10 years. And the maker didn't know anything about jewels. He says, listen, I'll take that deal. He took the jewels, figured out that he could barter and use that because that's how they did it back in those days.
Right, of course.
Took those jewels and he amassed wealth in so many areas that he didn't have access to initially. So he used his labor in trade for the jewels. And that kind of accentuates the point of, he didn't despise the free lunch. He looked at it and said, you know what? I can do this because I know how much it costs me to make bread every day.
Right.
It's not going to change what I know how to do in my sleep, meaning I don't have to work any harder. I'm already doing it, and I'm getting something that I never had access to, which are these jewels that I can in turn go somewhere else, and now it's a commodity, and figure out how to get other things in return to amass more wealth for me and my family as a bread maker.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So it's those types of examples that Robert Greene brings out in the 48 Laws of Power. It's fun reading. Some of it'll make you laugh. It's not, by any stretch, meant to be serious. But truthfully, I mean, it's a lot what, folks at the highest level in corporations, they know it inside out because it helps them also play the corporate games, that are out there in business. Working with management. If you're somebody that works at a big corporation, it'll help you in that way too.
Right.
But other things that I would probably direct you to if you want to know more about personal finance.
Yeah.
And in a story fashion, it's a probably a 46-page read, paperback, which has been out probably for about 60 years. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon. It's the first book I got when I decided I wanted to learn about finance, and it's written, in a kingdom in Babylon at the time, and it talks about some of what I just referenced around barter because they didn't have cash and things like that. But the principles are all there. Pay yourself first. There's 7 principles, and they walk through all of them. And it's a quick read. You can read it in less than an hour or two. And it's a good book. I got it for all my kids before they went into college, and now they're done. And they're they say, Dad, it's a fun read, but it also gives it to you direct, not a lot of high level jargon and technical terms.
Right.
Just very simplistic stories that you can apply to your life no matter what you do.
Okay. That's actually excellent. And those 2 books I'm actually going to look up and purchase for my own self to read and to educate myself on. It's unbelievable, but we have actually been talking for, according to my timer here, we're at 48 minutes, believe it or not. And I normally cap off at about 35 to 45 minutes. And I know people's attention span is not that long. So I'm going to put you on the spot on live. Will you come back and do some more teaching for us?
Hey, I would love to. I appreciated you kind of extending the offer the way you did a few weeks ago. I think now more than ever, if we reach 1 or 2 folks and they take 2 or 3 things away, Darius, I think this is a great venue, and I'd love to participate. I appreciate you, for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're definitely going to have you back on, Ron. So I always do this with my guests. How can people get in contact with you? Can you leave your contact information for us?
Sure, I can. I'm with CapTrust Financial, and the best number to reach me on. Oh, actually, I'll give you my email address.
Yes.
It's homeron34@gmail.com. That's my name backwards. homeron34@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions, or you're looking for any kind of guidance, or if I can help direct you in any way to other experts in the field, feel free to give me a call, or actually.
Right. And you also have a social media presence. I know you use LinkedIn as well. Can we get that information?
Yep, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me under ron.homer@captrust.com. And you can type in my name, Ron Homer. It'll pop up, in search. I'm one of two Ron Homers that you'll find there. We both look a lot alike. That's my dad. That's the other one.
Right, right. Exactly. Well, listen, Ron, we had a great time. I believe my viewers and listeners have learned a whole lot from you today. This will be running, number one on YouTube. It'll be running on Facebook, on my personal page, and on the Different Echelon page. I just can't tell you enough. I actually, and I'll show everyone here, I'm not ashamed. I took notes. So all the things that you said, I'm going to go back and digest it all. But we got to have you back on real soon. And I'm going to say definitely before the summertime comes. And we'll get you back on and we'll talk a little bit more about some other things.
Okay.
So I ask you not to hang up. I'm just going to, kick you out of the studio and I'll say a few parting words. But thanks again for being a part of this. Ron Homer from CapTrust Financial. Once again, we'll thank Ron Homer from CapTrust Financial for being a part of the Different Echelon, now part of the family. Gave us great information, gave us great tools. This gentleman is a wealth of knowledge, and we just couldn't cover it all in this time period. So he promised to come back. I'm going to hold him to it. We didn't go over this. We both from New York, so we'll get a pizza or something. We'll get it to send up there as a gift. But once again, gave us great information about how to manage our money and to resist temptations and to do the right things. Talked about credit scores, how to raise your credit scores, and just being disciplined, and how to pay yourself first. That's a principle that I just learned that I'll be happy to put in. But of course, within reason, don't want to overextend myself, and I suggest you guys don't do that as well, or do that either. Anyway, once again, thank you guys for being a part of the Different Echelon podcast. Well, we're here to educate, encourage, and to enrich. Next month is the month of February. This month is already, I feel like we just got into 2021 and already the month is already up. So I have to say this, I'm not one of those people, but I'm very blessed and very happy to be tomorrow celebrating my 42nd birthday. Of course, I would shout out my father in heaven and my mother in Somerville, South Carolina. Thank y'all for creating me and allowing me to be a part of this earth and this world. But I'm very excited, very happy. I'm not ashamed. I do want to send a shout out to my cousins, Keisha, Kima, and Kenya, the triplets. Their birthday is today. So love you guys. Look forward to seeing you as soon as this pandemic stuff kind of opens up a little bit. But once again, we'll be back here next week. Same time, same bat channel, a different echelon. Please share this with your friends, your family. This information is very vital, as is all the information that we discuss on this podcast. So thank you guys again. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for giving me your listening ear. And I hope this has been a big blessing to you and words of encouragement. You guys stay safe, stay blessed, and just take care of yourselves. All right. Have a good evening. See you next time. Bye-bye.